I was born in 1918, December 31st, Ethiopia.
New Year's Eve?
New Year's Eve. I guess my mother said I wouldn't wait.
In Ethiopia?
Yes.
What part?
Gondar. Now there's a lot of argument about that, is that being in the Virgin Islands as a small kid and the transfer of the island from the Danish to the American, there were a point in which you had to be proclaimed an American citizen or Danish citizen or not, and papers were transferred. And so for many of us youngsters, we wound up with American papers of the Virgin Islands, and so there were some disarrangements or so, but didn't bother me one way or the other.
How did you get from Ethiopia across the Atlantic?
Well, according to the family, is that my father went to Brazil to work as one of the people in the Consul General office, and the transfer of coffee, you know, the trade between the coffee, and that's how he went down there.
That's what he did for a living? That was his profession, or what?
His profession was barrister, and barrister and quote-unquote gentleman farmer.
Where is he from?
He was born in Ethiopia.
He's in Ethiopia?
Yeah. My mother's a Puerto Rican.
Uh-huh. What did your father look like?
My father looked exactly like me.
You looked exactly
like me. The older I
like
get, the more I look like my father.
No. Was he home much, or what?
Well, my father was between farming and law, and at a short time he taught at a place, the Moravian School, in, I think it's called Friedenstell. There were 3 Moravian churches, one in Christiansted, one in Frederiksted, and one in the countryside, a place called Friedenstell. And he did some student teaching there. That means he taught. So he did a few different things. And on the other hand, my mother and I had nothing in common.
Really?
You couldn't tell that my mother was my mother. By looking at us, there was no way in the world you could tell.
And she was from where?
Born in Puerto Rico, the eastern end, in Fajardo. The family, primarily, the family were in St. Croix, St. Thomas, and Fajardo, the eastern end of Puerto Rico, and a number of them were in the island off they called Vieques. They originally migrated from Yemen, the group, to Spain. They were called Ladinos, and then they wind up in Puerto Rico. In making a study of the background, for instance, my mother's mother was called, her name was Seppi. My mother's father was Cruz. Was a Cruz. And so between those 2 families, then another part of the family in Puerto Rico is called Matas, Dr. Henrico Mata and so forth. I knew much of that part. And there was another part that went to Cuba called Haywood. My mother had a twin sister, and she went to Cuba, and that part of the family became Haywoods.
What religion were you born into?
I was born into the Hebrew religion, and in the Virgin Islands, unfortunately, there was only one synagogue. And
well, wait a minute, who was Jewish? Your father?
Both parties.
Your mother's Jewish too?
Yeah. And my father found it necessary at time to dabble in Roman Catholicism. Since in St. Christ there was no Jewish synagogue, there was one in St. Thomas, and seeing a black person who was Jewish was an oddity. And as it's still even up to today, as a matter of fact, most European Jews denied there was such thing as black Jews at that time, and only since the Operation Moses last year did a handful of them admit there is such thing as black Jews. Not one of my teachers taught me anything about Africa, even the best of them. Did your father teach you much about Africa and tell you much about? Quite so. In discussion, my father would always, because of his own knowledge and because of being in the UNA, the Garvey movement, anytime I would speak about certain things, as a matter of fact, when Daddy spoke to me about the Torah or the Old Testament, he constantly pointed out to me that which is of Africa in it. For instance, Daddy would say, well, Moses, he was an African, he was born in Egypt. Long before, when people look at the map, and although they saw Egypt there, didn't recognize Egypt as being in Africa, my father had made that very clear to me. And my father gave me my first books on that, the Book of the Dead, and such books were knowledgeable to me at an early age because of my father.
How did you come to the States and when?
I came to the States in the Second World War.
Why?
Well, the boat was coming to the States.
Okay.
And I had a man who was supposed to be uncle. I said supposed because there's arguments. And especially my family life is kind of argumental as to who I am really in those contexts. And he and another man brought the numbers to America, Caspar Hussein, he and Pompey. So I came to and spoke with him.
Where was this? What city?
Here in New York.
All right.
And
Harlem?
yeah. And I made my ground here for a while.
What year was that you came to New York?
I came in 1944, I think, 43, 44. And
right in the middle of things.
right in the middle of the war. Yeah. And then I made some contacts. I had wanted to go to school here. I've always had a fascination to go to Columbia University, but they weren't taking people with my color in certain professions, certain disciplines.
Did they tell you right to your face?
Oh yes, there was no doubt. You had applications with a form, and you had to put your picture. And then they had many kinds. You had colored, Negro, and foreign. So you got to come from Africa and get in to study where you couldn't get it as a Negro or a colored. And they had different classes. If you were foreign black, you weren't a Negro or you weren't a colored. They had all kind of stupid classifications. And so, and then there were time foreign black, Negro, colored. You just couldn't get in, period, because that discipline, they didn't take black people or African people to study in that area.
What was this discipline you were trying to get into at Columbia?
Anthropology.
Anthropology.
Yes, sir.
How did you become interested in that?
Well, for a number of reasons. The African movement for independence was going on even though there was a war.
In Harlem, it was very active.
In Harlem, in the Caribbean, some people in the Caribbean, and naturally in Europe and so forth. The Nandi boys from Nigeria, the Kwame Nkrumahs and the Nyomboro, Awolowo, these are names that may not be familiar to some of the young fellows who follow African nationalism, but those were the big names at the time.
Well, I wanted to ask you, what was Harlem like when you arrived in those days?
Harlem was something. Harlem was Harlem. Today, Harlem is a shadow of itself. When I came on a Saturday afternoon, or a Saturday, 100 Lenox Avenue from 110th Street up to the river, I would say from 5 o'clock in the afternoon, about 90% of the people on the street. People sitting on the stoop because there were no air condition. And
when you say up to the river, you mean at 155th?
Yeah. Harlem in that time, if you heard a person snatch a purse, people would speak for that about 2 weeks. People would be speaking about that. It was so rare. Harlem at that time, drug was maybe 1 or 2 musicians, maybe. It wasn't even a musician. It wasn't common. Sunday afternoon in Harlem, from on 7th Avenue down, was Easter. Every Sunday was Easter.
You mean everybody had
everybody dressed in their best. 8th Avenue, up 8th Avenue, Duke Ellington's take the A train was true. But you get up 145th Street,